Both of us single dads from the Midwest, we can talk about it. Both of us single dads from the Midwest, we can talk about it. Both of us single dads from the Midwest, we can talk about it. Or we can get gully, I'll size up your body and put some white chalk around it.
Welcome to the Single Dads of the Midwest, episode 14. I'm joined by the astonishing Andrew to talk about his work on Austin's Improv Party, as well as his own experience writing and directing his own short film, which is amazing, by the way, and we'll put a link with his consent. But yeah, Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for having me on the show. My name is Andrew Chen. I'm the writer-director of Ghost in the Gun, a short supernatural Western. But my background is mostly, computer science. I work, for a big tech company. So I do the filmmaking sort of moonlighting on the side. So I've been doing that for a while. And then I've also been working with my friend Austin, who was really interested in improv. And we volunteer at a local TV access studio called the Mid-Penn Media Center. And so he produced an improv show that I helped co-produce. And, we had a lot of fun doing that.
That's awesome. And for anyone that might be listening to this new, I actually have done an episode with Austin himself, which you can check out. I'll also post a link to that. But going into Austin's Improv Party, so how did you become involved? Did he reach you? Did you go into that? And how did you go from working in computer science to be like, oh, I want to help with this project?
So, like I mentioned before, Austin and I were volunteering at the cable access studio on other people's shows. And so while we were setting up the show, like I was doing lighting or whatever, we would just be talking on set and we got to know each other that way. And then so we started hanging out, we play board games together, go see movies and stuff. So when he brought up the idea, he asked if I wanted to help out. And I love improv. I don't necessarily do as much like for the entertainment one, but I'm part of another improv group out of Oakland called Interplay that uses improv forms for like self-development and create, helping build your creativity. So I was, very interested to help out Austin, and we had a lot of fun. And before, each of the episodes that we taped, we would have a few, just practice sessions at his house with people over and just kind of get into it. So that was a lot of fun too. And then for what was the second part of the question? How do I get into the movies?
Yeah, well, basically, what made you even volunteer to begin with? So it seems like you were working at the Mid-Penn Media Center or volunteering there beforehand. But how did that even come about?
Oh, so okay, rewind many years. Like I was kind of pondering what I wanted to do next in life. My professional career seemed stalled, and I was like looking for something creative. And I was on a retreat and talking to one of my friends there, and I suddenly realized like she was like, well, what are you really interested in? What have you always wanted to do? And I said filmmaking. So ever since I was a kid, my family has been really into films. We watch like classic movies with my mom, and my sister and I have always been into movies. So I thought I wanted to go into that. But since my background was in, like this STEM stuff, I didn't go to school for filmmaking. I thought I would have to, go to school for it or something like that. But during the retreat, I realized maybe I should just like Google it. There must be something out there where I can just like kind of learn firsthand, not necessarily have to go to film school. And sure enough, there was a film co-op in San Francisco called Scary Cow. And so when I found that, I joined that. And, that's where I learned most of the filmmaking stuff, behind the scenes. Like I ended up doing a lot of on location sound and practicing my writing there. And then one of the members there was, he knew about the Mid-Penn Media Center and kind of said, oh, since you live down in Mountain View, you should go check that out. So I ended up going there and volunteering a bunch and learning sort of the TV production side of things, which is very complementary, but different to the filmmaking methodology.
That's awesome. And I did notice that in your short film, it said like Scary Cow Productions at the end. So it seems like they've come a long
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. So tell me about like all the, well, not, tell me about, I guess, within reason, like all the different things you learned while working on Austin's Improv Party. Because it seems like you and even Austin himself were like learning on the fly. So I'm curious, like, what were like the like challenging parts? What was like the cool stuff you learned? What was the stuff you didn't even expect to learn?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of things. Some of it is just like the technical on-set production, like how do you mic an improv thing? Because we had several people there, like over a dozen, and then Austin would just kind of dynamically, randomly call people up. So we didn't have enough mics for like everyone. So we had to figure out a way to, get enough volume on everyone on the stage. And so that was a challenge. And we had to, string some mics up and then kind of space it out and adjust it from episode to episode to improve it. And then there were things like, which kind of improv forms work better, on the set. We were also trying with some green screen stuff. And then when we had to move to Zoom, like that was a whole nother, like, which kind of improv forms work on Zoom better. So that was, yeah. So we learned a lot there. And then personally, I think that was the first time I had to do some of the singing improv forms, like, and that kind of terrified me because it's like you really do have to think quickly. But then I guess I learned, like, if you do it enough, and then you kind of have to get out of like your conscious mind and just go with it and not worry so much, and then just like whatever rhymes, just go with it and not think too hard. So so I definitely learned a lot working on Austin's show.
Nice. Yeah, I know he on his podcast he also mentioned like figuring out different things, and one of the things he also mentioned was the mic situation, having less mics than performers. I'm assuming you guys are still like doing it, right? I'm just assuming via Zoom and other methods.
Well, we haven't in many months. The last one we did was in June, and I'm still supposed to be editing the episode, but I've been pandemic procrastinating. So at some point we'll probably do another one because he moved to Colorado. So, but because of the pandemic and doing it at Zoom, it's like, oh well, actually we can just continue to do it even if he's in a different state. So that's the good thing that came from that.
Nice. What was your favorite moment, or at least favorite moment so far on Austin's Improv Party? Like behind the scenes or in scenes, any moment.
I think I think it was in our practice sessions because I had a lot of fun. And that, when we were doing that, I don't have to worry about the cameras rolling and all the technical things going on. And I could participate more and not worry about being, producer. So we had a lot of fun with that. And, when I was able to get through some of the singing improv forms, that was a lot of fun. That felt pretty good.
Nice. And I'm curious, I mean, both you and Austin seem like really chill, down to earth guys, but I'm wondering if there was any like creative differences or conflicts that ever arose on the show.
No, I wouldn't say so, but like even though Austin's very chill, he does, care about like the quality of things. So after every show, we would kind of do a download with him and his sister and kind of review like what went well, what could have gone better, what should we do next time. But I don't like we didn't have any like big disagreements. Sometimes we had some slight, differences of opinion, but it was like I don't know, like it wasn't like anything major that I would, fight him for. We would usually try it one way, and then if that didn't work, we'd try something else. But and then in the end, I thought of it mostly as his show, so I would, defer to him if there was any kind of questions.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I figured it was from everything I heard, like the show is very enamorous and people working together, which is awesome. So you're doing this show, things are going well. Well, I guess I don't know actually know the timeline, but how do you go from that to like, oh, on the side, I'm gonna write and direct this amazing short film called Ghost in the Gun?
Well, so actually, the film happened many years ago. I started pre-production in 2014, and we did the principal photography in 2015. But it took several years to finish the edit because it was really tough. And this was probably where I learned the most as a director in post-production and editing, because in the early cuts, it was a very sort of linear narrative, and it was pretty much along the lines of how I wrote it, but it wasn't quite working. Whenever we would show it to people, they would get confused. Like, for example, the character who gets hung, like the original Ghost in the Gun, in the original written version of it, you don't see his face. And so people got confused. It was like a point of view hanging. So people get confused, like, who is that? And is that the same person as the guy that wakes up in the middle of the desert? So we had to like figure those things out. And then, like there was just a list of all these issues when we test screened it, and got feedback from people. So we worked through it. And the breakthrough happened. I was I was working with my friend Rena, who really was instrumental in kind of figuring out the edit. And we would just meet weekly and work on this incrementally. And she had this insight that we could treat the gunslinger as sort of like the mysterious mysterious gunslinger. Like we don't have to show him up front. We can just that's why we were able to rearrange it and kind of go in a very nonlinear order. So like you don't see him till later, and that actually allowed us to condense things like introduce the girl early on, and then kind of solidify those characters and consolidate. And that actually made the storytelling a lot cleaner. And it was something I wouldn't have realized before, because for some reason I was very stuck in this like linear, thinking of how the story should go. But being able to do flashbacks and just kind of rearrange everything kind of really opened things up and allowed us to just make it a much tighter story. And then once we figured that out, we were able to finish pretty quickly. So we actually finished in the summer of 2019. And I was hoping that 2020 would be the year where we would take it to film festivals and do all that fun stuff. But most of them were either canceled or changed to online. So we still did participate in a lot of online ones, but it wasn't quite the experience that I was hoping for. There are a few that got postponed till 2021, so that's good. Like including Comic-Con, which that one should be fun. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, man. I'm not saying this to flatter you. Like everyone that knows me knows I have very, very strong opinions on like movies and music and television. Very strong opinions. And no, this was phenomenal. Like I think I definitely wish you all the best with promoting this movie, because it definitely deserves all the love and attention for being such a short film, but feeling like it's like so much bigger than that. And so I guess
Thanks.
I'll start. I have so many questions, but we'll start from the beginning. It's like, all right, what made you be like, oh, I'm gonna write this screenplay, this like Western like sci-fi screenplay?
So when I was in Scary Cow, right, actually a different director wanted to do a Western, and I was all excited about it, and I, volunteered to help out. But that ended up getting put on the shelf, and he had to go do other projects. So it made me think to myself, like, well, what would I do if I made a Western? So I started, talking about some ideas with one of my friends, Eric Lind, and we're just tossing some stuff around. And he had the idea of kind of the original setup of like a guy waking up in the middle of the desert with this gun, and so and the gun being possessed. So then I kind of paired that with my idea of the conflicting agendas of revenge, because I thought that would be interesting and could kind of fit in a short. So then I wrote kind of like the short screenplay on it, and then kind of workshopped it a bit in the Scary Cow writing group. And then it took a while to do the pre-production, because we were scouting out locations, and that was tough, because even though California is the one of the classic Western lands, and there's lots of places to go for tourism related to the Old West, they actually are not good for filming, because they have a lot of modern things in it, like pavement and like electric lights and just like random stuff. So it took a while to find that old Western town that actually happened to be at a private ranch that they rented out for weddings and like corporate events. So we were able to rent that, and then we found a bunch of other locations, like throughout the state, or actually more closer to the Bay Area. And then we also went down to the Pinnacles, down near Death Valley. So that's where like some of the more rugged like desert scenes are filmed.
So was the production all done through Scary Cow? Because I'm like, how does like someone just writing a screenplay go from like that to like scouting locations and actually filming and all that stuff?
Yeah, actually, it was a pretty ambitious project for Scary Cow. A lot of the seasoned producers that I talked to there, they were like, they didn't want to touch it, because it was like, you're going to do all this, and for a short. And I just figured, if I was going to do it, if I could only have one chance at this, I would just do it, like, just go big or go home, right? So, if you look at it, it really does have all the things in there that they tell first time filmmakers not to do. There's like animals in it, work with kids, like outdoor filming, like CG, like pretty much everything that you can imagine, to make it complicated. We did. So that was a lot of fun, and it was challenging. And but really, the editing process was a lot harder than I thought. And so even though we got through the filmmaking, the principal photography, and I thought, oh, that we got all the hard part stuff done. It actually turned out that the edit was even harder. So, but Scary Cow, no. So there's a lot of very dedicated people there, and we're all volunteering our time. Everyone's very passionate. So normally for these shorts, we would work on the weekends and film in different places. But people were, man, really interested in doing a Western, and we're really having a great time when we were filming. So we did, plan, like a weekend at Toronto Pinnacles, and at these different locations and stuff, and people were really great about their time, and we just tried to have as much fun on set as possible, and make sure I feed the crew and everything, and it was a blast. And I think they enjoyed it too, and we got a lot of stories out of the experience as well.
Yeah, I was gonna ask a couple questions about that. One, like, how did the funding come into play? So, like, did Scary Cow help provide the equipment and stuff? Because, like, the shots, for instance, were like really well done, so they had to come from like high end cameras. So I'm curious, like, was this like a personal finance project, or did Scary Cow come in? How did that work?
So it's a mix of things, right? Like, so the cinematography was done by Stephen Burke, and he's a pro. Like, literally, he does that for a living. And so he used his camera, and we just rented some lenses for the specific types of shots he wanted to do. And then for the rest of it, a lot of the crew that's volunteer from Scary Cow, they own their own equipment. So, for example, like the on location sound, like they would have their own, but then we would rent some too. Like, a lot of it was like lighting equipment, like and props and things like that. And so the money for that came from kind of three sources. Like, I threw in a third, like my parents and family like put in a third, and then I did a crowdfunding on Indiegogo, and that raised about a third. So all together we were able to raise enough for the whole thing.
Nice. And the actors, I'm curious, were those like volunteers? Were they like professional actors? How did they all come on board?
So the lead, Darren Bridget, he was SAG. So he was the one person. Okay, not just him. I guess Tim Russ also is SAG, but most of the other ones were volunteer, or either we knew them or we found them on some of the local casting sites. And then a lot of the background extras were just like people we knew or friends or people that contributed to the Indiegogo campaign. Um, and then so we did casting calls to find them, but it was I think really important to get a good lead that can play, that could play like the vintner, but then also the possessed gunslinger. So we were really lucky to find Darren. He's a local Bay Area actor, does a lot of like stage acting. So that was, we were super blessed to find him. And then Tim Russ was sort of a coincidence too. Like, during pre-production, one of my producers, Tony, suggests that we find sort of like a more famous actor, so we can kind of elevate um, the profile of the film. And originally, he was like, "Well, maybe we only need them to do the voiceover, because before you weren't gonna the original version, you weren't gonna see the original gunslinger, so we just needed the voice." And he was like, "Oh, what about one of the Star Trek actors?" And it just so happened I had just met one of the a producer that I worked with a lot of Star Trek actors on the like the fan films. And so he hooked me up with Tim Russ, who was super gracious and like said, sure, like, I'll do the voiceover and stuff. And then after we figured out the changes to the edit, you know, we were like, well, if we're gonna have someone in front of camera, why don't we see if we can get Tim? And again, Tim was like super gracious, and he was like, sure. So we ended up doing that green screen shoot down in Burbank with him, and then we're able to like just kind of insert him into the original footage of the hanging scene, and that worked out really well.
Yeah, shout out to Tim. That's awesome. Um, how long did filming take? I'm curious, like the whole movie.
So there were 13 original principal photography days, and so that was over the course of I think 2.5 months because we mostly shot on weekends. That was
Mhm.
like in we started in September, October, and we finished up in November. And then we had a few pickup days where we just had a few shots that were missing. Um, so yeah, like the filming stuff, if you condense it, it was just a matter of a few weeks. But then like in total making it, I think um in terms of a calendar, it took what is it from 20 like 4 or 5 like 5 years total, I think.
Dang.
So it yeah, so this was definitely a passion project, and I can definitely say from firsthand experience, if you're taking a long time on a project, it's okay. Like and I found there's lots of people that happens to, because it's for me it was really important to get it right, and I'm glad that it did, that I took the time to do it. But it was really hard those middle years, in like 3 years, where it's like everyone kept asking me like, well, what's going on with the film, like how's it going, are you done yet, like, oh, is it, why is it not done? And it was like this monkey that grew into this gorilla on my back. But I think it was really worthwhile, like after just continuing to chip at it little by little, and then finding different friends like Rena that really helped out. It's like eventually we kind of broke through, and then we're able to finish it. So it felt really good to finish it, and I'm pretty proud of what we were able to do together.
That's awesome. And I guess that brings me to editing. It seems like that was like the biggest chunk of time and where you learned the most. What were like the biggest lessons that you learned, and like what was your experience there? Because it seems like the movie was almost like redone again in a sense because you changed from like how you envisioned the movie to like this nonlinear structure.
Yeah, because they say the movie is created three times, right? Once when you write it, once when you shoot it, and once when you edit it. And I finally really understood that firsthand. And like, what the purpose of the different stages are. Because, like when we were filming, for example, there were things in the script that I wanted to do. Like there's a scene with a vulture where like after he transforms, he shoots the vulture and it, lands. But we weren't actually able to find a vulture prop. It was super strange because I thought that would be really easy to do, but it didn't happen. So I had to change that scene like the day of, and he ends up, I just said like he should just practice with the rocks, and I think that actually turned out a lot better. Like one of my favorite shots is when he shoots the rock and it pops, like we did that as a practical effect, and that was probably my favorite shot, and it was just a single take. But then anyway, so then with the editing, I think the biggest lesson I learned is people perceive films differently, like the information that they're getting and how they process it. And that, although I think I kind of knew that, it was amazing to realize like how different people think, like completely from person to person, it can be so different. Because when we were doing the initial screenings to get people's feedback, they would give us very different like when they pieced together the narrative and explained it back to us of what they thought was going on, it was a lot different than obviously what I had in my mind. And for the people who are making it, we kind of know. So we have this you know we kind of have this extra information in our heads, and that kind of biases how we see things because we already know what it's supposed to be like. But for everyone else, they're just piecing it together and they don't have that information, and that's the hardest gap to overcome, because you don't know what you just sort of passively already know. It's kind of like one of those tricky things, and so it's hard to just kind of like come at it with a complete blank slate again, and see it as like the audience sees it. So doing a lot of the test screening and getting a lot of feedback was really helpful in doing that, and also getting opinions from different people, like because we had several people help on the edit, and they had different points of view. And like my other producer Samantha was the one that suggested we put someone in front of the screen so that they know that the person being hung is not the same person as the other one. So like things like that, it's like you have to, as a director, take all this, all these suggestions, and then kind of understand like if it helps the narrative or not, and then make these decisions around it. And that kind of meta process is sort of, I guess, a skill to learn as well, because you'll get a million suggestions, but you shouldn't necessarily take them all, but you also shouldn't ignore all of them. So it's really tricky to kind of figure out what it is that you want, and then which of these things will help you execute on it.
Got it. No, that makes perfect sense. It seems like one of the big tools you referenced earlier was like basically doing like certain edits and then like showing them to test audiences, and then from that kind of going back and working on new fixes.
Yeah, yeah. So that iterative process, I think, was really valuable.
Nice. Anything else like really big lessons that came up in editing?
Yeah, it's like you have to let some things go. And it's really hard. I mean, they have that phrase. What's it with the baby? Like, um, oh, it's like you sometimes you have to kill your darlings, right?
Hmm.
And so, but it's hard to say which ones you need to kill and which ones that you should keep. That's the thing they never tell you. But there's a few things where it's like, oh, I really want to hang on to this, and I guess it was just because I had thought of it that way when I wrote it, but it really didn't necessarily make the storytelling any better. And so eventually I gave it up. Things like keeping the hanging scene as a point of view, because when I wrote it, I was like, oh, I've never seen a hanging scene as a point of view. I thought that would be cool, and so I really wanted to cling on to that, but it turns out that was actually detrimental to the storytelling, and people didn't get it, or I didn't have the material to give the context so that it made sense. So like figuring out which things that you have to let go and which things that you want to keep are, I mean, that's the tricky part.
That makes sense. What was your what was one of the most challenging parts of making the film? And it could be in any part of the process, not just the editing. And what was or at least one of your favorite parts in the filmmaking process?
So those all kind of come together when we were filming at Toronto Pinnacles. So we were filming with a very bare bones like skeleton crew, but it was actually really fun because we were under a time limit, and we just were would set up, do the shots like quick move and then set up. And so it was very like run and gun kind of guerrilla filmmaking, and it was a lot of fun, even though it was challenging. It was just fun. Um, and one of the days we were filming the scene where the guy wakes up in the desert, and Steven was out getting some footage of the sunrise, and so I was with the rest of the crew scouting out a specific location to set up. And as we were driving around, I told Darren, um, our stunt guy, like he was driving the van, and I told him to turn around and go to this other spot, and then we ended up getting stuck in the sand. And so it was like we had a very limited amount of time, and like our I hadn't quite found the location yet. Like the van is stuck, and we had to like take out all the equipment. I had to find the place, and like we had to hoof it out there. And Steven came back. He's like, what's going on? And it was a crazy scramble to get set up for that. But the good thing that came out of it was that instead of doing like all the different shots we were going to do for that scene, we ended up doing it as a one take, right? So, and that turned out to be much better, and I thought a great way for that scene. So it's the magic of filmmaking is that even though lots of crazy things happen, and this also kind of plays into the improv thing, like that can turn into being sort of the best thing that you may not have thought of, and it can help improve like the thing that you're making. So you don't have to, rigidly hold to what you had envisioned before, but if you can kind of go with the flow a little bit, like improv teaches you to, then you can kind of harness the unexpected things and turn out with something better. And I think that is the thing I love the most about filmmaking.
No, that makes a lot of sense. The happy accidents and learning to deal with the punches that life throws. I'm glad. I'm assuming you guys were able to get out of the sand eventually.
Yeah. So while we were filming, like a couple of the people would run it back and forth to the van and help Darren Breen like dig out the van, and they were able to get it like right before the park ranger came, because that was the other thing we were worried about, because if they saw that we were like off trail,
Yeah.
we could get fined. So we were like under a ton of pressure for that scene, and probably the most stressful day of filming during the whole thing. But it was also the most fun because once you get through it, it's like this like huge relief, and just the camaraderie that comes from that was just great. It was a lot of fun working with everyone there.
That's awesome. So with all this experience that you have now making a film kind of basically from scratch, what advice would you give to anyone who's looking to write and or make a short film?
Oh man. Um, I would probably say don't do what I did, but like, but but really, um, just go with your passion because you know the thing is now that I've been through all that, I probably wouldn't consciously choose to do it again because I know the difficulties. But sometimes the bliss of not knowing how hard it is to make it actually makes it possible to do, right? Because if I knew all this like when I was planning and doing pre-production, I probably just wouldn't do it at all. So, and everyone who had been pretty experienced was like trying to dissuade me. But if you're really passionate about it, like you just have to take the chance and do it. And sometimes that, not being aware of like the difficulties makes it possible to actually get through those things because when we were doing it when we were filming in the desert or whatever, it was just like we just had to get through that day, that moment, and that's what gets you through it. But if you're like thinking about it 3 months out when you're pre-planning, it's pretty intimidating, and like that's too hard to get through. So I don't know, I would say like follow your passion, like even if people they're who are more experienced may try to dissuade you, like sometimes you just got to do it. And if it doesn't work out, maybe it doesn't work out, but at least you tried, and I think it's still worth it.
That's amazing advice. Definitely, shoot for your dreams for sure. Was there anything else about the making Ghost in the Gun that you wanted to talk about that we hadn't covered yet?
um I don't think so. There's just so much serendipity that happened and so many great people on the cast and crew, like in every part of the process of making it. So like when directors get kind of like all the credit for the film, they really just are a proxy for all the people, because every department, like every person has to kind of be doing their A game for the film to turn out well. Because if sound isn't good, the film sucks. If the costumes aren't good, the film sucks. So it's like even craft services has to be good. Otherwise, the cast and crew aren't happy, and then the film sucks. So like it's like a really great cooperative endeavor, and that is probably one of the other things I love about filmmaking, because it's one of the few things I can think of where you have so many of these different skills and trades that work together to make one creative thing.
Hmm.
And so that's why I would encourage anyone who can, like, to just make films, it's like short films or whatever, even if they're messing around, because it's a really just fun creative exercise.
That's actually something I was considering, and I was wondering if you had advice for people who maybe don't have access to like something like the equivalent of Scary Cow or like fancy equipment or stuff like that. Like, do you think iPhones are a good way to film, or if you're just looking to make something casual, what would you recommend?
Yeah, my recommendation is just start with whatever you have. Like my very first thing when I was getting into film, um, I bought like it was like a GoPro or whatever, but I was just filming with that. And then yeah, cameras are so good, like phone cameras are so good nowadays. They have 4K or more. And there's like a Filmic app where you can control the camera better. You can do a lot of cool stuff with that. And also, it can play into the style of like what you're doing. Because I know, I remember one project someone did, they were using like the backup camera of like a Prius or something. So you can be creative with
Wow.
whatever you have, and it's not really the equipment per se. Obviously, if you have access to better equipment, that's great. But
Yeah.
um, there's so many things that make filmmaking more accessible nowadays. Like there's iMovie. There's um, like recording equipment you can buy online that's not too expensive, and you can get really high quality like audio recording. And so there's so much stuff out there now. And then people are really into it, like, so just finding a group of people, um like Scary Cow, yeah, it's a great co-op in San Francisco, but there are also filmmaking groups like in every state in cities everywhere. So, hop on whatever social media, see if you can find like your local, group of filmmakers, and just start with whatever you have. And, just don't worry about making like the epic, whatever. I mean, I just did because, whatever, like, because I never know like how long I'll be able to do
Yeah,
this, but just start somewhere and then just iterate and like make improvements, write lots of things, like try different shots. And, like improv, don't be afraid to make mistakes, and you'll learn from all of your experience, and you'll just get better. And then you'll, like any other, skill or art, you just get better at it the more you do it and work on mastering it.
nice. Actually, that does bring up another question that I thought about is how did you go from once you made the movie and you have an actual product ready to go, so to speak, to like marketing it so like people can see it so that people like, get excited. It seems like you went to some film festivals, although with COVID, there's some delays. But yeah, how did you promote the film, in other words?
Yeah, so there are people out there that you can hire to help with like the poster, for example, which I did. And then yeah, there's also, I think, like the press packets that you can make, um, that I was working on. But also, yeah, like the film festival circuit is a great way to promote the film, and obviously going on podcasts, and having articles written. So and just like word of mouth too, make sure like all your friends and family and everyone, when you finish it, like watch it, and then they tend to pass it to other people, and because that's helped out as well. And just have fun with it, because shorts, they end up being kind of like calling cards for other things that you might make later.
Nice. Um, Also, I was gonna ask, are you okay with me using or putting a link to your film in the description for this video?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
um, yeah, after the film festival circuit is done, I'm planning to release it, on YouTube or Vimeo for free. But right now, we're still keeping it private for the film festivals. But then at some point, I can give you the link for when we post it.
Cool. Yeah, just whenever you're ready. But yeah, man, I think that was most of my questions for the film. Again, anything else that you wanted to talk about that you didn't have a chance to talk about yet?
Um, I don't think so.
Well, Andrew, that was amazing. I feel like we learned so much. I am like, I have all these screenplay ideas in my head, and like, I'm more like motivated now to like, actually try a little bit harder. But I really appreciate your insight. I don't think I've talked to someone that's made a short film before, basically from scratch, and it is a phenomenal film for all those listening. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Oh, so about screenplay writing, if you're interested in that. So I know, so there's sort of like the formatting of it, and then there's the writing of it. And a lot of times people get kind of tripped up in the formatting. And I tend to recommend, like, don't worry about that so much in the beginning. Like, you obviously need to learn that, and that's part of the trade. But like, you can focus more on, the content of it, like the dialogue, or whatever. And what I found was, it's really important to just write it as like a page turner, like
Mm.
make sure like, like it's really interesting, and people like want to just keep going on. And like, don't be afraid of rewrites. And also, I mean, what helped me, I think, learning screenplay writing was also downloading and reading the ones that, for like the Oscar films, because
Yeah.
every Oscar season they will put out like links to the screenplays of them. And it's kind of helpful to see like, how do they, for a given scene, like how do they describe that scene. And then sometimes it's fun to like watch a movie and then at least think in your head, if not, actually write it down, like how would you write the screenplay for that scene, as it's filmed, as you see it, like how would you write it down and describe that scene, so that it's interesting. And that, so that those are helpful exercises.
Nice. No, that's good to keep in mind. Really appreciate the insight and tips.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks again, Alex, for having me on your show.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much, Andrew, and can't wait to get this out there.